All right, guys, thank you for your time. Again, we should be in the business of webinars, I think, these days. But it's another really crucial topic that we're covering today, and that is the monthly JobKeeper ATO declarations. They're only available as of Monday, and with a bit of experimenting and mucking around, we realised that everyone really needed to know about this and what's involved so they can make sure they get these things done. Because at the end of the day, if you do not lodge your monthly JobKeeper declaration with the tax office, you get no JobKeeper money at all reimbursed to you from the tax office. Hence, it's crucial, and the timing of it is crucial. So what's going to happen is Charlotte, and sorry, I should have introduced both Charlotte and Kate. Charlotte's going to take the initial part of this presentation, and then I'm going to follow through and do the rest of it. So Charlotte and Kate, thank you for coming on. I don't know, Kate and Charlotte, are you both there so I can make sure I can hear you?
Yep. I'm here. Okay,
cool. So Charlotte, I'll let you roll with this, and when you want me to go to the next slide, if I don't do it, just give me a nod, and I'll go to the next slide, and then once you finish, I'll transition and handle the rest of it.
Okay, no worries. All right. Well, thanks for that. So as Adrian mentioned, this is something that's so crucial at the moment because there's no JobKeeper money that's going to come through until we complete this. Now, just so everyone's aware, for those of you who are bookkeeping clients of ours, this whole process will be taken care of by us. However, we know that some of you aren't bookkeeping clients, or you might have a separate bookkeeper or do it yourself. So this is aimed more so at you guys, but still informative for everyone to listen to and know the process. So with those of you who have outside bookkeepers or you're doing it yourself, just make sure that you're on top of getting all the income reconciled as quickly as possible for April, because you'll need those figures to do everything that we're going to talk about today. So the bit that I'm going to be focusing on mostly is the employee side of things. So there's a few bits and pieces of information that you have to communicate to the ATO, and there's turnover figures, which Adrian will be touching on more in his part, but there's also confirming eligible employees. Because basically this declaration is just the ATO's way of cross-checking that everyone who enrolled is eligible for the month that they've selected, that the employees communicated via STP match up with what's been paid and who is actually eligible, and so on and so forth. So one of the things you have to make sure that you know is how many eligible employees and that you've paid them and from what period you've paid them. So we use Xero as our main payroll software. So that's the example that we're going to use on these slides. It will differ a little bit in other payroll softwares, but it'll give you a general idea. They're all pretty similar. And one thing I did want to point out is there was some talk at the beginning of all this that the declaration may be able to be made via STP software. However, we have had confirmed to us by Xero, and my research indicates it's across the board, that this will not be possible. So these declarations have to be made via the portal, be it the tax agent portal or the business portal. So either if you don't have access to a business portal, then you'll need to get your accountant, your tax agent, or your bookkeeper to do it on your behalf. So if we look at Xero for the moment, I'm just going to take you through to where you can get this JobKeeper information from. So the slide that's up at the moment is showing you the payroll area. So if you're going to payroll pay runs, this is what comes up. If you look at this little I information thing, you can see that highlighted in blue is the payroll support page. So if you just click on that, it'll take you to the next, what's on the next slide. If you want to go to the next slide, Adrian. Thank you. So this is basically the government COVID support area, and there's a few bits and pieces in here, but the main part that's relevant for today is the employee settings. Now, I apologise, it's a little bit blurry because we've had to blur out some things because of privacy, but hopefully it gives you the general idea. You can still see it pretty well. So if you go up to if you look up the top, it says JobKeeper settings. So if you click on that, it'll take you to the next slide, please. Next slide, please, Adrian.
Oh, sorry. Oh,
Thank
hang on.
you.
Sorry about me.
Thank you. So this takes you into the employees area. Now, theoretically, your bookkeeper or yourself, whoever's taking care of payroll, should have already been into this section, but if not, it can still be done. So what this comes up with is a list of all your employees separated out by nominated, if you've gone through the process of nominating already, eligible and ineligible. So you can see, for example, in the slide that's up there, that I've already gone through and nominated for this entity, the 4 that are eligible. So you can use that as a base point to make sure which employees have been nominated and which haven't, and you can use that when you're filling out your declaration. Now, there is obviously going to arise times where you need to maybe remove an employee, say if they've resigned or whatnot, they are no longer eligible, and that is possible to do in Xero, the same as adding in employees. But the important part to note is that it's not communicated to the ATO until the STP filing following the nomination. So for example, if I were to stop JobKeeper on someone today and save it, that would not be communicated to the ATO until I next file a pay run. So it means that if you do go in and make a mistake, it can be undone so long as you haven't filed anything. If you have, then you just have to ring the ATO and get them to do it from their end. But I'll just show you how you do it. It's pretty simple. If you want to stop someone, you click on Stop JobKeeper. Do you want to go to the next slide for me?
Oh, let's do it again. Right.
Thank you. And it comes up and you just have to select which pay period or JobKeeper period, I should say, that they're ceasing from. You click Save for reporting and it'll sit there and it'll be sent over to the ATO when you file your next pay run. Or on the other side of things, if you want to add someone, do you want to go to the next slide for me?
Yep.
Thank you. Same thing, similar sort of thing comes up. You pick whichever fortnight you need to add them for and click Save. And just a reminder that for April, you still do have 2 days to take care of the payments for employees. They extended the deadline. So you've got till the 8th of April to make sure that everyone has been nominated who you want to and that they're all paid. So that's that side of things. And then what I've added here is basically just the 3-step process that the ATO has outlined. And I know Adrian's got a similar thing on his slides, but I just wanted to show you basically. So step 1, enroll. We've covered that in previous webinars and not something we're going to talk about tonight. Same with the first half of step 2. However, the second half, maintain your eligible employees. What I just talked about is where you're going to do that. So that's the one thing you are going to use STP for, is to remove employees or add employees. And it's where you're going to ascertain who you are, or basically who you need to declare to the ATO, yes, I'm paying them for JobKeeper. So step 3 is what Adrian's going to talk about, which is your declaration. And as I mentioned, it has to be done through the ATO portals. So I think that's pretty much me covered, unless there's any questions about any of that.
Any questions, guys, about the first part of it before I get into the monthly declaration? If so, put them in the chat box, not the Q&A box, please.
Yep. Question?
Do you want to just unmute them or you're talking?
What's your question?
Yeah.
Sorry, can you type your question, please? Sorry.
You can unmute her if you want.
Or is it too hard? Is it easier to try and talk?
Just go up to your participants.
What?
Your participants.
Hang on.
There you go. And you just find.
She might still be typing it. It might be long.
I don't know. I'm not
Oh,
sure.
here we go. For
Okay.
business participants, will we have to identify them in the portal? Yes, correct. You will.
We're going to
And
cover
Adrian,
that in a minute.
That's
yeah.
coming up right now.
That's coming up.
Can the monthly declaration be submitted by a paper copy or must it be done through the portal? Must be done through the portal, mustn't it, Adrian? There's no paper
As far as I'm
copy.
aware, it's only done electronically, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Any other questions? No.
Hence
Doesn't
why
look
we're
like
doing
it.
this, to help you guys, because
Yeah. Yep.
All right. I'm going to start my part of it. Thanks, Charlotte.
That's right.
The really important thing, which I want to reiterate before I start anything here, is two things. One, this is easy to remember. No declaration equals no coin. So basically, if you don't do this, you're not going to get any money from the ATO. It doesn't matter whether you pay your employees and all that sort of stuff. This element is the cross-check that the ATO require before they'll release any funds whatsoever. Now, the second part to this is there's three types of guys that we work with in business owners. There's the ones that we work with where we do the bookkeeping. We'll be taking care of this for you. You won't have to do a thing unless we need some specific questions answered for us to complete some of this. But generally speaking, you won't have to lift a finger to do anything other than provide Charlotte some information if we're missing it to be able to complete financials and other bits and pieces. Part two, second type of people we work with is where they've got a bookkeeper other than us. So if you've got a bookkeeper other than us, then your bookkeeper should be the ones that are doing all this heavy lifting for you, should be doing all of this for you, and make sure they are, because they're the ones that are best placed to handle that for you if you've got an external bookkeeper, and make sure they're all over it, because it's important for you, obviously, to get money, that they're all over it. The third type of business owner that we deal with are ones where you basically do your own bookkeeping and you don't have an external bookkeeper. And there's nothing wrong with that at all. But what it means is two things. If you need access to the business portal to do this yourselves. Now, if you're lodging your BAS electronically, you're going to have to do it on the business portal anyway. If you're lodging your BAS manually, you're going to have to get electronic access and get access to the business portal through the tax office, or none of these declarations are going to be possible. So if you do your bookkeeping yourselves, it's important to make sure you're all over this side of it and being able to manage it electronically. So, right, I'll now get into, in my example, I did this on Monday for a person that had one employee and one business participant. So it's going to cover the majority. The only difference between what I'm going to go through and what will happen with most of you guys who are using software or STP generated software for payroll, e.g. Xero in our example, I had to manually key in this for their employee. But if you've got STP generated software, I'll point out the difference when I get there, what the difference between, most of it's still identical to what I'm going to go through, but there's one difference, and I'll show you as I'm going through at what point that difference is and what it would look like if you had STP software that you were using to pay your staff and notify the ATO about JobKeeper as you're paying each person. So the first screen you go into when you get on the portal is, and you go into JobKeeper, this is what comes up. So step one, we've already done it, and that is enroll yourselves for JobKeeper, tick, enrolled. Step two, you've got to identify and maintain your employees eligible for JobKeeper. And I don't get too caught up on some of the stuff on the first slide. But required actions, if you're a business that uses STP software with JobKeeper functionality, ensure your eligible employees, and Charlotte covered this before, have been identified and lodged via the software. And if you don't have STP software, don't worry about 40 more employees. If you don't have STP software, it's not on this front screen. If you don't have STP software and you've got less than 40 employees, you can do this, but you have to do it manually. And that's the example I'm going through anyway. I'm going through someone that's only got one employee and no STP software. So that's the example I'm doing. And as I said, I'll point out to you the difference. And then step 2 is identify, and step 3 is to actually lodge the business monthly declaration. So I'm going to go through steps 2 and 3 with you guys now. So, oops, oh, it's done it again. Okay. When you hit identify, when you hit identify on this screen, this is what comes up. JobKeeper, identify eligible employees. Now, this is important. Before you start, you can't save this form and resume it. So you're going to need everything in front of you to be able to go bang, 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 bang. Because if you get 3/4 of the way through and miss something out, you're going to have to rekey it all in again.
That's me.
And you'll have to go back and start all over again. So have everything in front of you that we're going to go through now before you start this process. It'll save you a lot of headache and a lot of stress. So to complete this form, you will need the name, tax file number, and date of birth for employees and business participant. Now, if you notice, that's where I'll say a difference. If you have STP generated software, right, the name, my understanding is the name, tax file number, and date of birth will all come across. Okay, so you won't have to rekey that information. But if you don't have STP software, for every employee you've got, where they're under 40 employees, and business participant, you need their full name. I don't think you need their middle name, actually. I think it's first name and surname, tax file number, and date of birth for all employees and all business participant, if you're not having STP software to identify. If you do have STP software, then that information will come through. But we'll cover that in a minute. And you need to know your GST turnover for the month that you're doing and for the next month. So for example, obviously we're doing this for April. So you're going to need to know your GST turnover for the month of April and an estimate for the month of May. Now, for all you guys out there, there's 2 types of turnover. There's cash and accruals. Now, I won't really want to go into this. I won't go into this now, but however your BAS is prepared on whether it's cash or accruals, that's the basis you need to have your figures prepared. So for instance, if your GST is prepared on a cash basis, when you've got your estimated income for May and your actual income for April, it has to be on a cash basis at those figures. So they've got to mirror whatever your GST method is. Okay, and that's really important. We're going to come to step 2 in a minute. So I'll keep going for now. Employer eligibility criteria. As you'd see there, it talks about confirming eligibility requirements for employers and employees and business participants. So we're going to go through. So part 1 is what you need handy before you can even start, which is, as I said, all those details in part 1 is what you need before you start. Part 2 is what we're going to go into now, because once you, the next part of this, it gets into these bits and pieces in more detail. Employer eligibility. I'm not going to go through this. I'll leave it on the screen so you guys can look at it later. But for everyone who's been on our webinars, we've covered this anyway. And for all intensive purposes, you know, I'm not going to revisit all this. I think you'll understand that we've been through this before, and to be an eligible employer, you need to tick these boxes, okay? And you can read that at your leisure next. Employee eligibility criteria, I'll leave that up for a little bit too. That's the next bit. I'm not going to go through all that again either, because we have been through that with our webinars as well. But you can, at least if I've got that on the screen for a minute while I'm talking, you can read that later and make sure. You've got to make sure that all eligible employees, you can tick all the boxes here. And importantly, that they've signed a JobKeeper employee nomination notice. Now that nomination notice I have covered in other webinars, but you don't need to send that to the ATO. What you need to do is have it signed by your employee who's ticking, yes, I nominate to take part of JobKeeper. And that's part of the enrolment process. You needed to have done that before you could enroll, so you knew how many eligible employees you had. You need to assess all this criteria and have a nomination notice. I think it's good business practice to send a copy to your accountant. And,
all of our guys have.
And all of our guys have sent these nomination notices in, so that at least we've got them on file. But understand the onus is on you guys to have these, not us. We're just a backup. We're not the main source. We don't have the originals. It's just to have a copy. So please keep them somewhere safe, at least to get through the next 12 months in case there's any questions asked once we come through the JobKeeper period. So the employee eligibility criteria, so that you check that as an employer you're eligible. Again, just quickly check it before you go through this process. This is, like I said, it's a cross-check again before you submit the final bits that the ATO will pay against. The ATO will compare this against what you've already said through your software and what you've paid through your software against this, match them up, and if it's all consistent, I imagine they're going to release the money. So that's checking the employer criteria, that's checking the employee criteria. Assuming you tick the boxes on all that, and you've got all the information from at the start, like I said, you're now basically into the first part of this, which if you remember from the first screen, and I'll quickly go back, was identify and maintain eligible employees, the identify bit. This is just getting you through to that stage. Right, so this is what comes up when you first go into identify, because the JobKeeper system runs from the ATO fortnights, runs from the 30th of March to the 27th of September. And as you know, who've been on our webinars, payments are in arrears. So April payments are not paid till May. And as you know from already being on this webinar, that April payments aren't going to be made until A, you've paid everyone the required 1,500 minimum per fortnight, you've notified the ATO, and you've done this declaration. You have to have all three tick the boxes. So now it says drop down box down the bottom, the month that you're applying for JobKeeper. So what I've done is, in this example that I was doing for someone, it was April. So I selected April. Just so for your knowledge, it came up with April and May. So here it came up with April and May, and I chose April. So the majority of people we're working with, it'll be April, right? Because if you paid people in April, it'll be the April period. And then you have to select, as part of that, both fortnights that were relevant for April. Okay, so basically you've chosen that you're selecting the month of April and that you're selecting fortnight 1 and fortnight 2 for April, which are those periods. Okay, next. The next thing that comes up is business participant details. And you can read there all the eligible criteria. Again, I'm not going to go through all that, but it's designed again to be for you to make sure that your eligible business participants still meets all these boxes. And once again, see down the bottom, they're meant to have filled in an eligible business participant nomination notice. And for those who have been on our webinars, we've spoken about that at length. And just like an employee notice, the eligible business participant has to fill in one of these, and it has to be on file again, nominating who it's going to be. And the onus is on you guys to keep the originals and hold them on file. And understand something else. You can't be an eligible business participant if you're an employee. The reason this is in place is so if you weren't drawing a wage as an employee of your business, it gave you the option, and you're running your business obviously, but weren't drawing a wage for whatever reason, this at least gave you the option of nominating it as an eligible business participant and getting JobKeeper for yourself in lieu of not being an employee. So in my example, it then came up with, do you want to identify a business participant? Yes, no. So I selected yes, obviously. And here, this is where you've got to enter. And this will have to happen for everyone, because whether you're using STP software or not, the government, the ATO, do not know who your eligible business participant is. They only know who your employees are, which is through your STP software. So for everyone who's got a business participant, you're going to have to complete this part. And what you need handy is the tax file number and date of birth, and then you hit confirm, and then you go next. Now, I've obviously blanked this out, but what comes up, it does a cross check, and then it actually, the blue bits is the person's details, where I entered the tax file number and date of birth here. So where I entered the tax file number and date of birth, it cross matches its own system and re-puts here in their computerized the tax file number, the date of birth, and the last name and given name. Now, as you can see there, I didn't key in the last name or given name. All I put was the tax file number and date of birth. So what it means is you can do a quick cross check and go, oh, it's the right person because it's who I've got the nomination, the eligible business participant nomination form for. Now, I'm going to take questions at the end, guys, because I want to just get on a roll with this, and I'll do all my questions at the end, okay? Like I've done the last few webinars. I find that far more practical. So you data match this, and assuming that's the right person and marries up to the eligible business nomination form, then that's a tick. And obviously for this person, they're claiming fortnights 1 and 2 as well, just like as a participant. So therefore you had the option, which I didn't say because I didn't think it was relevant. You had the option of choosing fortnight 1, fortnight 2, none, you know, whatever. For most people, it's going to be claim fortnight 1 and 2. So that's why I just accepted that. Now you've done the business participant. Oh, and actually, sorry. And I imagine, right, and of course, we're not going to know until the end of May, but I imagine once you've done this, you only have to do it once, and next month it'll automatically come up. This is what my assumption is. Next month it'll automatically come up, and you'll just have to select which fortnights that you want to claim for that person. You shouldn't have to rekey all that information. I'm hoping the ATO system is smart enough to remember all the details, and you've just got to tell them down the bottom here which fortnights you're claiming for that person, which will save a bit of time, obviously, next month. So next, remember this time, it's number of employees. Do you want to add eligible employees? Now, my understanding is if you had STP software, what would happen here is it would list your employees that are potentially eligible as per your software. So for instance, if in Xero, you said there was 2 employees that you've told Xero to tell the ATO that you've made your payments, you know, these are the people that are eligible, and you've made the minimum repayments, all that sort of stuff. Say there's 2 of those. My understanding is those 2 names will come up here as automatically then being potentially eligible. Okay, that's just where it's going to save some time, and you'll see that in a minute. So do I want to add eligible employees? So at the moment, you can see the summary is for fortnight 1 and fortnight 2, I've got 1 business participant for each fortnight. Now, please understand evidence required. I'm going to draw this to your attention because at the end of the day, the onus is on you guys to have all your declarations on file for employees, business participants, and to be able to back up any turnover figures, anything on here, you've got to have, and they say this multiple times. So there's heavy penalties for false and misleading information. I know they'll cut people slack for a while because this is new, and it's seriously, this stuff's changing every couple of days. So at the end of the day, just do your best and have everything as best you can. And I think you should be okay in terms of that. So at the moment, there's 1 participant for both. Now, actually, sorry, I got it wrong. It's on this screen that the employee would come up. So for instance, if I had no here, right, I didn't want to add any eligible employees, my understanding is what would populate in this field here down the bottom is the employees that have already been told by STP software. It'll come up with their, if you see down the bottom, it'll come up with their last name, given name, TFN, date of birth, and JobKeeper status. That's what would come up. Pre-populated is the employees there, which would mean you shouldn't, unless you've got new eligible employees who aren't showing as pre-populated, which they should be, because if you, well, who knows? Don't say can't with the tax office. At the end of the day, if you've paid these people through STP software and you've let them know, the ATO know that you're JobKeeper, they should come up here. And I went into someone else who with only a couple of staff, and it did pre-populate here. So I'm hoping that's just to check. I wanted to use this example because it's a manual employee, but that did come up. So I'm hoping that will happen in everyone's situation. So if you didn't want to add eligible employees, it'd just be using these people. But we're adding an eligible employee because remember, we're doing it manually. We've got no STP software. So I've ticked yes, and I've put no for 40 employees. And then it says, then you've got to key in down the bottom, their tax file number and date of birth, and hit confirm, which is exactly the same information of the business participant. So I keyed it in, and this is what came up. This is like the cross-check, a similar concept of the cross-check for the business participant. It'll automatically coming up by keying in the tax file number and date of birth and hitting confirm. It'll come up with last name, given name, TFN, date of birth, and here, right? So effectively, for this person I've keyed in, I then put claim fortnights 1 and 2, and then I hit save down the bottom, because remember we're only adding 1 employee. So then it gives me a summary. So look, I must admit, the software is pretty good in that I think it's all pretty logical with how you key it in, and it gives you nice little cross checks all the way through. So this cross check now is, I've got 1 business participant for both fortnights and I've got 1 employee for both fortnights. So the total subsidy is $6,000, which makes sense. And once again, see the evidence slide thing down the bottom. It's just comes all the time. So this gives you a nice little summary that, and you should be at this point going, yes, I've got 1 business participant and I've got 1 employee and it's both fortnights. That marries up, $6,000. That all makes sense to me. How about we hit next? Okay, now you've done all that. Remember step 2 was identify all employees and business participant. At this point in time, that's the end of step 2, right? Step 3 was the monthly declaration. That's where you are now. So when you go next, when you hit next down the bottom, this is what comes up. So it says the month you are declaring, April, the fortnights, 116, and you can see down here the figures, GST, current April turnover and projected May turnover. Now, I mentioned this again, so I mentioned this already, but let me mention it again. That GST turnover has to mirror, sorry, the turnover figures you use here, you have to use the same cash or accruals method you use for GST. And what has to happen is in this box here, there, the April GST turnover, that has to be the actual GST turnover for the month of April. And this figure here, the next figure, is just an estimated GST turnover for the month of May. Having said that, if we've enrolled for April, which clearly we have in this business's case, that means, remember at the start and remember through all the webinars, you've got to drop 30%. Assuming you tick every other box of eligible employer and eligible employee and eligible business participant, you've got to, the next part of it is this turnover. Now, you've got to drop 30%. So what I think is a crucial cross-check, let's assume your GST is cash, just to keep it simple. Then what you have to do is when you're putting in this figure here for April turnover, as per your software on a cash basis in my example, whatever that figure is, make sure you do a double check of what the April 19 figure or March 19 figure is, which is the 2 you can use unless you're using the alternate test, which I'm not going to go through today. But I am going to be putting out a webinar not really a webinar that everyone can come on to, but just a quick update. I'm in the process of going through the alternate tests at the moment. Believe it or not, they only came out on Friday, which is the 1st of May. So most people were already enrolled in JobKeeper by then. But anyway, thanks for that, government and ATO. But anyway, so I'm in the process of reading through all that. I'm going to do a quick update that everyone's going to get access to as to the alternate tests. But the way it works is you can only use the alternate tests if the basic test isn't appropriate. And that's going to be covered by, for majority of people, the basic tests are appropriate. So I'm not, that's why I'm going to just focus on that. But as your cross-check, as a final cross-check, I would be checking that your cash GST actual turnover for April 20 is at least 30% down compared to March 19 or April 19. Because if that's the case, that figure in here is actually what you're going to tell the government. So you need supportive documentation to justify that anyway. So if that was me, put it this way, for the ones we're going to be doing for our bookkeeping clients, we're going to be making sure that we've printed out the 19 figures a year ago compared to the actual, say cash in my example, compared to the April 20 cash figures, and making sure they're at least tick the 30% or more box.
Because
and
that's where the ATO will do it.
Because I think that's where you're going to be asking for trouble, potentially with this whole system, is making sure you meet the 30% drop. Because I think, like Nita just said, I think that's where they're really going to put a lot of their energy, is into making ssure people have dropped 30%, and also making sure that it hasn't been contrived, manipulated, and has some integrity. Now, if you've been if you've been on all our other webinars, you would have known that there was a lot of integrity issues with everything. There's certainly going to be some questions asked here if you don't dot your I's and cross your T's, because this is a lot of money they're potentially giving out to JobKeeper participants. Now, so to me, have one final cross-check, because you've already cross-checked that the business participant is right. You've already cross-checked the employees are right. So your last cross-check is that your turnover at least drops 30%. Now, my personal opinion for the May turnover, not really that big a deal, because the reason I say that is once you've dropped the 30%, it doesn't matter in the system of JobKeeper whether your business recovers and income goes up from here. You only have to meet that test once and you're in JobKeeper for the rest of the JobKeeper system.
And that can be March or April.
Yes.
Yeah.
March or April you can use for here.
They've stated,
well, not for turnover for this year, comparing it to last year.
yes, but it can be either March.
You
or
can
April.
compare it to March 19 or April 19, and then we're not going over all that because that was all in our previous webinars. But what's really important is that you do a final cross-check and make sure you've dropped your 30%, because once you've dropped your 30%, you don't have to get too concerned if all the turnovers moving forward are higher or much higher, because it doesn't matter. We got told by the ATO the reason they want that information is so they can get they're hoping that JobKeeper will help businesses recover. And so they're wanting to see those figures grow because that supports their methodology that the economy's recovering and businesses are recovering. So the only really important thing is the turnover for the period you're claiming, and that's more than 30%. After that, it doesn't matter too much about the figures. As long as they're roughly about right, it doesn't really matter. And for me, not many people are going to know exactly what May's going to look like. So my intent our intent is to probably use April figures and round it up a little bit and not get too concerned about it, because that doesn't matter in the scheme of things, in our opinion. And moving forward, the actual figures are going to be accurate, but it doesn't matter if they've gone up because you're already in the JobKeeper system. And in my example, I put the figures in. So I put in the actual and the May, and it comes up to you to confirm the bank details. And if it's wrong, you can edit it, right? And once again, there's the evidence screen coming up again. So it's coming up all the time in your face to remind you to keep checking and keep making sure you're okay. And then the last bit of information is you tick the box down the bottom and hit submit. And then you've actually finished. Now, once you do that, this is what comes up. JobKeeper Business Monthly Declaration. The information has been successfully lodged. Your business declaration will need to be lodged every month before the wage subsidy can be paid. It would have been nice if they said that at the start too. I don't think they did.
No, they didn't.
And there's an ATO receipt ID. If you hit the print friendly version down the bottom, this is what comes up. JobKeeper. Now I've got this over several screens, guys, because it's actually obviously to make it so you guys could read it, I had to spread it out over a few screens. But the next few screens, it's all on one document, right? And you can save it as a PDF and print it and whatever else. It says date submitted, ID, what month you've done, the business participant, it reconfirms that and what fortnights, how many employees, how many business, and the overall summary, the bank details. So it's basically a summary of everything you've already keyed in. GST turnover, projected turnover, it lists the employees in what fortnights. And that's the last screen. When you're finished, it now comes back to enroll was all the thing that was ticked in the first part of this. In the second part of this, you've now identified, and it now says April declared tick. So basically, at this point in time, you have fully completed your monthly JobKeeper declaration. So, Questions? Let's go through some questions.
Go back up.
Hang on, I'm just going to go back up to the top.
Yep, no.
Hang on, guys. I'm just
No, you
going
don't
to
need
see where the questions are.
There's nothing there.
Okay, someone's written, I've made a mistake and didn't realise until I hit submit. It appears to be too late. I would be ringing the ATO if you've got an issue with that and get them to manually change it at their end. Once you've hit submit fully all the way through, there's nothing the portal can do. And a couple of times, for instance, we've enrolled people with what they thought was what they told us initially was the right month, and it ended up being the wrong month. We've rung the ATO as their tax agent and got that changed, and they give us an ID number to support it, but you don't get anything in writing as such. You'd have to ring up. So next one.
Although SAG has submitted our employees, so yeah, basically enrolled to the ATO, it appears we have to resubmit them in the portal. Is that correct?
No, it's not necessarily correct. If you're using STP software, so all we've done at the moment, right, for you guys is enroll you in JobKeeper. You've given us copies of the declarations. Remember, the ATO don't get those. When we enrolled, we just said how many employees were eligible, right? So, and if you think about that now compared to what I've just gone through, what the ATO are wanting to do is to cross-check that against the JobKeeper STP document. If you've been paying your staff through STP-enabled software, which I'm assuming it would be the case if you're using Xero or whatever software you're using, I would imagine that would be STP-enabled, and those employees would automatically flow across. So all you would need to do in that instance is, if you're nominating a business participant, put their details in. If you're not nominating a business participant, then go to the employee bit and go through and select all of the employees that should have come through, and assuming are correct, you go, yes, fortnights 1 and 2, yes, fortnights 1 and 2, all the way through.
And if not, you've got to do it the manual way, like you've just shown.
And if not, you have to do it all manually. But I'm hoping that,
that's one,
because I know who this is, and I'm not going to broadcast it to everyone, but I'm hoping that would be STP-enabled software, which would save you a lot of time. But all the other stuff, even with STP software, you've got to do everything else I've done anyway, especially the business participant. Now,
can I just say something there? Just with the STP-enabled software, you do, though, have to do those extra steps like I did in Xero. I'm not sure in other software how you do it, but you do actually have to select, like go into their JobKeeper area and select the eligible employees and their fortnights. So you have to make sure that's done. It won't be automatically done by the software.
Yeah,
okay.
cool.
Good to know.
And I'd assume that'd be the same with MyHub and Quicken as well. I would
Yeah.
assume they'd all be pretty similar.
Yep.
Now, is the business participant the trust or you? The business participant is always you, because at the end of the day, if you've got a trust and you nominate yourself as the business participant, you're deemed the business participant, so it's your details that goes in there, not the trust details, because the trust is the one that's receiving the money on your behalf. So the employee is always the individual. The business participant, whether it's a company or a trust or a partnership, is always the individual as well. Next.
I thought you could drop the, we answered that one. It could be either April.
I've already answered that,
April,
so that's
March.
fine. What happens if overnight?
You've got to read the question out. What happens if April 19 to April 20 shows a 28% drop in actual turnover, but our projected April 2020 turnover was high enough to show?
No,
projected.
it's going to end up being done on actual.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, that's the whole point of this monthly declaration. It's done on actual at the end of the day, because obviously at some point in time when people registered for April, there were some estimates in there because it was during the middle of April that was all being done. So there was obviously some assumptions that were made, but at the end of the day, if you haven't dropped 30%, then you're not eligible in April. So there's not much you can do about that, except if you've registered for April, I would imagine you just put 0 and 0, or you ring up and get the ATO to change it to May or whatever period. But at the end of the day, I wouldn't be risking, because it's self-assessment, right? So you can just go, oh yeah, cool, no worries. They might never find out. But I wouldn't, with this sort of thing, I don't know what the auditing's going to be. I don't know how they're going to check. I don't know what they're going to do. But I would be being really careful with it, and I'd be if you haven't made 30%, I wouldn't be claiming it because I think you're asking for trouble.
And I do agree with that one. It says grown. Oh my God, we've done more than that. I cracked the nannies yesterday when I found out about
Also,
this.
we do our own bookkeeping, but Charlotte does our BAS. Would I have to access the business? I don't know. Charlotte, can you see that question?
Yeah, and I know who it is, and that's obviously related to the one you were just talking about with the turnover before. I think we might need to have an individual chat about that and working
What
out.
about that question?
Yeah, so so you guys won't have access. We will need to do it for you, but I'm wondering with the turnover part of things whether alternatives might be possible. So I think we need to chat about that outside.
Alternative tests, you mean?
Yeah.
Well, that's fine. We can look at that. And as I said, I'm going to do a summary. And getting that out probably tonight or tomorrow, probably more likely tomorrow, about the alternative tests, plus also some state-based stimulus options. I'm giving an update on that as well. Next question, GST turnover is ex-GST. So it has to be, because otherwise it doesn't make any sense. So everything's ex-GST usually with,
sense.
well, then again with the ATO, who bloody knows?
Hang on, can I interject there though? BAS figures are inclusive of GST. So
yeah, but I'm not, I know that, but with these declarations, they're not going to be including GST figures. They'll be wanting ex-GST figures.
They actually haven't clarified.
I disagree, sorry, because the BAS figure includes GST. So to me, the turnover figure would include GST as well.
It won't make any difference because
it's not going to make any difference at the end of the day, as long as you're comparing like with like.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, the ATO actually haven't been very clear on that. So, but as we're saying, it doesn't matter because if you're looking at one, as long as you're looking at the same GST inclusive or exclusive and you've dropped to 30%, it's sort of irrelevant.
It is irrelevant at the end of the day. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me just watch this.
So just read them out.
Someone was not able to watch this. Is it fair to tell her the following the submission requirements in the STP software? Ours is QuickBooks Online. So I'm assuming QuickBooks Online would be STP enabled. So we've used Xero, but I imagine it'd be a similar process.
And yes, this is out there for everyone to share, guys.
Yeah.
This is designed.
You can forward it on to anyone.
Other.
You can forward it on to anyone. Don't care because we're trying to help everyone here. This is so bloody confusing.
We knew a lot of our clients were going to be stuck. It's not stuff that you're used to doing, and so hence why we did this to help you all through it.
Yeah. Next question is, could you get this to lodge us to lodge it for you? I use Reckon and it uses STP. We contact us individually. I'm not going to mention names on here, but yes, contact us individually and we'll be able to sort something out for you. What's the next thing? 30% turnover, no, it was March, which was put in the enrollment process. It's only asking for April turnover. No, but that April turnover is 20. So yeah, I don't know exactly because they said you could use March 19 and they said in the process you could use March 20 to March 19 or April 20 to April 19. So
can I interrupt there? Won't that be because you elected April when you put the enrolment in?
You can't really elect.
I don't think you have an option.
I don't think you can elect March.
No.
But when you enrolled for JobKeeper, did you have to pick which month you were electing for, April or March or May?
You did have the option to do March.
Yeah, so if you've elected March in the enrolment, my assumption would be March will come up in the declaration, but that's just my assumption.
No one that we've done this for, as far as I know, not many people have used March. Most people have used April because March was still using turnover, still had most of the month they were turning over.
Okay,
we only had one or two with March.
So there you go. So maybe Charlotte's right because I used the April example. Maybe with March, it would ask for your March 20 figures, I would assume, in this example, because we chose April 20, it would ask where that's the figure you've got to put in. I would assume if you've used March, but then I don't know because the JobKeeper only runs from 30 March to onwards anyway. Sorry to interrupt you, when I just read the literature just before, it said if you don't meet the requirements at 30 March, you can elect April. So to me, that indicates you can use March, but they're expecting most people to use April. And the reason is because most people started shutting down 2/3 of the way through April at the earliest. March at the earliest. So I think they're working on the assumption that a lot of people would still meet March because the real effect wasn't until April.
And to be perfectly honest, if this is the information and that's the data that they're collecting, if it's wrong, they're finding it out too. Like if you made an error like that, then hey guys, they've got to cut us some slack there.
And Kate, you said there was 2 that were March.
Yes.
I think this is the one that we're talking about. I think we changed it from April to March, didn't we?
Yes, we did. We called the ATO on that one.
So I don't know at the moment what's going to happen when because I think you guys do your own bookkeeping too. So I don't know what's going to happen. This is all a learning curve for all of us. I went into April, so I've just worked with an April example. And to be honest, 95% of our clients are April. So I don't know.
Give it a go and see what happens.
You can let us know
Yeah.
what happens. We'd appreciate that because this is all learning curve for all of us. To be honest, this is a working model, and Jesus, there's going to be lots of little issues as we go along for everyone. You ask the ATO. It's certainly a work in progress. So if you can keep us informed about what happens when you go to lodge the March, please let us know. Yes. So you said just confirming the obvious that if you only drop it for May, you wouldn't have to do one of these until May, basically. So, so my understanding is that you wouldn't be able to do one of these for April because you're not enrolled. So May would be what you would use this for. Everything I've done would be for May instead of April, effectively.
Can I read that out? Yep.
I have an invoice that was sent on the 27th but is not paid till the 4th of May. It depends on, this comes back to cash versus accruals. So it depends on your BAS, whether your BAS is cash or on accruals. If your BAS is cash, it's done on when you receive the money. If your BAS is accruals, it's done on when the invoice was raised as to which period it falls into. So it actually depends on your GST method and whether it's cash or accruals. Cash is done on receipt, accruals is done on invoice.
But if it was March, then when you dropped, it's irrelevant.
Yes. Yep. Yes, QuickBooks is STB enabled. I'm a director receiving a weekly salary. Correct. If you're and I know who that is, we didn't enroll a business participant for you. So
because you're getting a salary. So
because you're getting a salary, you couldn't be a business participant.
You're an employee.
So yeah, you're getting it as an employee effectively.
So when you go through and do that process, you're just putting yourself through as an employee, not as a business participant.
Okay. So next question, I used a TFN as the business participant and also an employee. Well, you shouldn't do a business participant if you're an employee because you can't double dip. You can only, if you're an employee, then you can't be the business participant. It's as simple as that. So that means it's actually wrong, which means you'll have to get the ATO to fix that.
There may be other people that could be the business participant aside from yourself,
Potentially,
but they're not the employee.
Potentially, depending on the situation.
If they're doing bits and pieces for you and your business.
It just depends. If they're not an employee, then potentially there's someone who might be able to be an eligible business participant, but not if they're also an employee. What's this?
March, but April came up. Oh, that's interesting. So
yeah, I'm not surprised by that. That's what I said.
And well, there's nothing more you can do. You've got to give those figures.
Correct. So using that example, they elected March, but April came up. What that means is put your April figure in as actual, but don't be concerned with that. Be concerned with the March figures dropping you 30%. Yeah. So and that might answer the question from before in that what that means is they're asking you to put the April figures in, and I get why, because this is for the month of April, right? But you don't have to be concerned with the April figures if you've used March as your test period, because what that means is you've just got to make sure that your March 20 dropped 30% or more from March 19, which means you're eligible for JobKeeper, and your April figure will go in, but it won't have any relevance. It's just a figure for stats, so it doesn't matter, right?
Kate did ask for
Yeah,
March.
so I think that answers the next question about March. I think, thanks to that, I think what it means is if you've elected March, you still put April figure in, but the April figure won't have any relevance on JobKeeper. What you've got to make sure, though, is that you've still dropped the required 30% from March 20 to March 19. You've dropped 30%, which makes you JobKeeper eligible, which means the figure you're entering in April becomes irrelevant.
It's just stats.
The only time the April figure becomes relevant is if April is your test period. If that's the case, then you've got to be careful.
Thank you.
Has anyone started getting JobKeeper money? I'm tipping not. Put it this way. The one I did manually for this, the one I used for my example, I did that Monday, and I've asked him to check every day.
Did you do Monday or yesterday?
No, Monday.
Oh, okay.
No, I did it Monday.
Sorry.
And I asked him, because you could do them on Monday, I did it Monday.
Okay.
I wanted to, this is why I put all this together for Wednesday, but based on Monday.
Okay.
So I lodged it for him on Monday.
If he's
And
there,
I've asked
if he's
him.
there, he can let you know, but he hasn't let you know.
No, he's
yet.
not on here, I don't think. Actually, yes, you are on here. Can you let us know? You know who you are. Can you let us know if any money's come through? But I've asked him to check his bank account every day because I'm intrigued to know how long it's going to take to get the money.
He says not yet.
Okay, so not yet. So as of Wednesday, that means Monday night it didn't work, Tuesday night it didn't work. So it wouldn't surprise me, guys, because if it takes a week, I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why I'm saying that. If you lodge a refund, sorry, if I'm lodging a tax return at the moment and I get a refund, that's coming through in about a week. So my tip is, I'm guessing, because we won't know, which is why that person's going to come back to us when the money comes in.
Someone else has said exactly the same
I'm hoping
thing.
it's a week, but who knows? It might be 2 weeks. No one knows. This is all new.
They were very quick with the...
Yeah, but the stimulus was auto-generated. What you're talking about is the PAYG stimulus. That was done based on lodgement of the BAS, and that was very straightforward because it was done purely on group tax. Oh, sorry, PAYG withholding tax automatically generated what you're entitled to, and bang, that came over. This is a bit more complicated. No, not a bit. This is a lot more complicated, and I'm tipping they'll do some cross-checking at their end before they release the funds.
Yeah, that's what this is all about.
Which is why you're doing all this, is to cross-check everything. So the ATO, because put it this way, if I was in the ATO shoes, I'd be doing exactly the same. Because once the money's released, good luck getting it back again.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it's going to be easier after month one. In other words, because as you know, you can't add new employees to this moving forward. You can take them if they leave, but you can't add any more because they had to be employed on the 1st of March. So there are some exceptions generally, but assuming that to be the case, that means at the end of the day, maybe it might be smoother after month one. Time will tell. Because I imagine they're still going to cross-check, but I think they'll do a lot more cross-checking first time round. But who knows? We'll all have to wait and see.
Someone else has said that.
And someone else has said the same. They lodged Monday and still haven't got anything either.
So yeah, let us know, guys. We're interested to hear.
Yeah. And next question, please confirm that I'll need to backdate from the 1st of April for all my employees, 1,500 a fortnight before the 8th of May. Now,
Correct.
Hang on. Assuming April is your test period, that you can drop 30%, or you have dropped 30%, and assuming you tick all the boxes on eligible employers, all that sort of stuff, say all that's ticked, then yes, the ATO have generously extended it to the 30th of, from the 30th of April, which is where they started, to the 8th of May. It means you have to back pay everyone for the 2 fortnights for April that the ATO came up before. You have to back pay everyone for the 1,500 a fortnight. But please, if you're doing that, don't overtax people, because if you're, say you hadn't paid them anything and you're now paying them $3,000, tax on $3,000 in one pay is a lot more than tax on 1,500 doubled. So please make sure that you don't overtax them second time. If you're catching up pays, okay? Now, what's the next question? Did anyone else lodge with STP and not have to put in the employee details? I think I've done something wrong as I put myself down on one employee and the sum was, I'm not sure. If you've lodged an employee through STP, that should have come through. Has anyone else out there done a declaration themselves already with STP enabled software, and did the employee come up fine or employees come up fine? Can anyone quickly type that in if that's the case? Because the one I went into, who wasn't this manual one, but the one I went into who had employees, theirs automatically came in, and I know they use a bookkeeper and zero STP software, and that definitely came up with the 2 employees that they were paying through their STP software. So has anyone else out there lodged a declaration yet with employees? Yes. So there's another one that says all employees came up auto via MIOB STP. So I think the STP part's working. It might be something done wrong as part of the employee process when they're being paid or when they were notified. Because remember, you've got to notify through.
Charlotte said too, you've got to do that step.
Yeah, correct. It's like what Charlotte said. You've got to nominate them for JobKeeper and tell the Xero about them, so that it tells the ATO about them when you're paying them, and the information that you pay them comes across to the ATO, which will filter straight into the portal. So, any other questions?
Yeah. Yeah, well, we feel like sorry, they just said I was doing too many things at the same time. I can't recall the list. Yeah, we get it. It's totally, this is just totally doing our heads in, guys.
We won't lie. When we saw this, we swore what was involved. We actually swore and said, hey, really?
And now they're withholding our money, you know? They say you've got to pay it to your employees, and now you're not going to get it. And we're not really advertising the fact that you're not going to get it until you fill out this declaration. Not happy campers, not happy campers.
Next question, what's the difference between turnover and GST turnover? Well, two things. It's cash versus accrual. So it depends on whether your tax turnover is cash or accruals and your GST turnover is cash or accruals. That's one element. Whatever you're doing, make sure you use whatever the cash or accruals GST turnover for these figures, right? But for GST turnover, what they're talking about there, like I know there's some dentists on here. Dentists have GST-free supplies. So what that means is if you're a dentist and you have some taxable supplies for GST purposes, but some GST-free supplies for GST purposes, you've got to add the two together, and that's deemed GST turnover. If you don't have GST-free supplies, it'll be the same. The only difference is for the they're wanting the two combined for GST turnover. In a lot of cases, that will be similar. But I know dentists are one example, and there might be some other guys on here that are different to that. But for the GST, for the dentist, you've got to add the GST free and the taxable supplies. It's all deemed to be GST turnover. So any other questions? Now we'll be sending this out either tonight or tomorrow as a link so people can rewatch the bits that they need to go over again. I've gone through it pretty quickly, deliberately, because it's night time and you know, everyone's had enough of webinars and all that sort of stuff. So I wanted to go through as quick as I could, and you guys can rewatch at your leisure, stop the bits and rewatch the bits you need to take in again.
As you have to do it every month for the next 6 months.
Yeah, it's going to become second nature over the next 6 months. So I'll pause for another 30 seconds and see if there's any other questions coming in. While I'm waiting, thank you, Charlotte and Kate, for coming on. Charlotte for taking it at the start, and Kate for coming on as support. Thank you, guys. It doesn't look like there's any other questions.
Thanks, guys.
So keep your eye out.
Yeah, thanks for that. We appreciate your thanks. That really does encourage us. I mean, at the end of the day, we're putting this together, so it's a tool that you guys can use. And as we said, share it, support each other. We're just here to support you guys. So if you do get stuck, you know, give us a shout out. We'll see whether we can point you in the right direction.
Keep your eye out for the link for this, as well as there'll be a link for the update. There'll be a link for the update of the JobKeeper alternate tests plus the state-based stimuluses, which will be coming out either tonight or tomorrow. That'll all be part of the one email. So keep your eye out for that. Yeah, and as I said, I gave you a shout out. If you need us to assist you in any way, just let us know. Just contact the office, and we'll sort out if anyone needs help who are clients of ours with this stuff in any way, shape, or form. Just shoot us an email, give us a call, and we'll work through it, and we'll help in any way we can. The team's there. You know, you got Charlotte, you got Kate, and they're heavily involved in all of this. And as you guys know, we're sort of at the top end trying to keep all the JobKeeper stuff going, and the rest of the team's trying to still meet all the ATO requirements of lodging tax returns.
But
So-
anyway,
So thanks for your time.
thank you.
And until next time, take care.
No more next time.
Yeah.
There's no more.
No, not that we don't want to liaise with people, but I'm sure they're sick of us too. But
No more JobKeeper.
until next time, there'll be a next time of some description. Take care and
Bye, guys.
give us a yell if you need to.